It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who comes from North London and by profession is a project manager, is Haria. When I think of Harshi and I think about the journey we've been on together at Vaani, I think of how knowledgeable he is, how experienced of a karyakata he is, and how deep his wisdom grows. I learn from him all the time. Haria, Bharat is a panacea.
The world is in turmoil. There's divisiveness throughout our society. Just this morning, while having breakfast, when I looked at a news article on my phone, the top headline was about Brexit. This is, of course, a very divisive subject in our country at the moment. In fact, Bhavani, if I ask you to look at an article today, the first thing you see in a news article on the web, what do you see?
The Economist says that Modi's economic policies are divisive.
Again, divisiveness. We're divided on race. We're divided on religion. We're divided on climate change. We're divided on the economy. We're divided on equality. Divisiveness is everywhere. There's also a lot of anger and hatred in the world. Just 3 weeks ago, Islamist terrorists walked into churches in Sri Lanka and blew themselves up. They killed 260 men, women, and children. If you saw one of the news articles at the time, you would have seen one of the bombers talking to a girl and walking in with her to that church. What kind of hatred was in their mind that they did this action? The same hatred was there 2 months ago when a white supremacist walked into a church and began shooting people. It was a mosque. The worst thing about this was he actually streamed this online on social media. You could see people trying to run away and being gunned down. Again, what kind of hatred was driving this? Both the acts in Sri Lanka and in New Zealand. And yes, we get shocked at the time. We stop for a minute and we watch the news. And then what happens? We go back to our everyday life because, of course, everyone is too busy. I'm an example of this. My everyday routine is waking up in the morning, getting ready, getting the kids ready. Of course, Madhvi helps to do a lot of this. Making sure that they've had their breakfast, going off to school, getting on the train, making my way into work, getting to work, and then thinking about what I planned for the day, going through my meetings, going through my presentations, and if I get some time, I may have lunch for half an hour. And then what happens? The day's finished, and I'm on my way back home again. And so I'm on the train again, thinking about what I have to do in the evening, getting home, having some dinner, making sure the kids have done their homework, and they're in bed. And then finally, I may have some time, and again, sit down with Madhvi, look at the phone, reflect on the day. And this happens day in, day out, week in, week out, month upon month. Is there a solution to this? Is there a solution to the divisiveness, the conflict, and the fact that we just don't have time? I believe there is a solution. The solution is Bharat. In my opinion, Bharat is a thought whose time has come. Now just take a minute and consider that. Bharat is a thought. We all think of Bharat as the land between the Himalayas in the north and the Indian Ocean in the south. But the thought processes and the philosophy that comes from Bharat transcends this. It transcends the mountain ranges, it transcends the land masses, and it transcends the oceans. There are three thoughts that I would like you to consider. The first thought is this: Vasudev Kutumbakam. The whole world is one family. This has been a thought that has been in our country for generations. There are various examples where our ancestors have demonstrated this thought. In the 10th century, when Islam was growing in the Middle East, the Parsi community, who were Zoroastrians, had to leave Iran. Eventually, the refugees got to the shores of Bharat. And the Maharaja at the time welcomed and invited the Parsis to settle in Bharat. The Parsis had a condition. They had brought with them the eternal flame of their God. Their condition was that when they set up a temple in which they can worship this eternal flame, no one else from another faith should enter. The Maharaja not only gave them land and gave them the ability to prosper, but he also gave them the freedom of faith, the freedom to worship their faith how they wished. Today, the Parsi community is an integrated community in Bharat. Another example of this is closer in history. In 1942, when the Soviets invaded Poland, they displaced a number of Polish refugees across the world. The refugees initially went to Serbia, and then they ended up in Iran. About 40,000 children, Polish children, were sent to Bharat. Again, the Maharaja, who ruled Bharat at the time, welcomed the children. Not only did he welcome them, he adopted them as his own. He built schools, he built hospitals, and for the next 5 years, he tried to give them some form of normal life, despite the war. When they returned to their homes, they settled in different parts in Poland and in other parts of the world. But even today, they remember the Maharaj. They've named schools after him, and they recognize the contribution of this king from Bharat. A third example is in 1948, in the creation of Israel. When Israel was created in their first session of parliament, they passed a resolution thanking Bharat, recognizing that Bharat was the only country in the world that had never persecuted Jews. Why? Because of this concept of Vasudev Kutumbakam. The second concept I'd like to talk to you about is Ekam Sat Vipra Bauddha Vedante. The truth is one, but the wise know it by different names. What does this mean? This provides us with a way to address conflicts. You can have different modes of worship. You can have different means of wearing clothes. You could be a different race. However, rather than conflict, through cooperation, we can resolve our differences. A popular saying in Bharat right now is, "Matbhed ho sakte hai, manbhed nahi hona chahiye." We can have differences of opinions. We can debate and discuss. But in our hearts, we should remember that we are one humanity. The third concept is of yoga. Self-reflection, self-regulation, self-realization. Through the practice of yoga, our ancestors have discovered a way in which we can construct our lives. We can take some time out and deal with the stresses that we have. Not to remove the stresses, but to learn how to manage those stresses. And then construct our lives to be happy. So 3 concepts. Vasudev Kutumbakam, Ekam Sat Viprabodha Vedanti, Yoga, and self-realization. I'd like to end with a story. This story is a metaphor. It's a kind of story that your grandparents might have told you when you were younger. Once there was a farm, a vast farm. Within the farm there was a beautiful garden. And within the garden there was a beautiful tree. This tree had been seeded. The seeds for this tree had been put on the ground by the farmer's father. He had made sure that the tree had had enough nutrients, was getting water regularly, and made sure the surrounding area was nice so that the tree could grow. Over time, the tree did grow through decades. The branches grew strong. It managed to get fruit as well. It was a mango tree. We all love mangoes. The farmer and his children benefited from the tree. The children would play underneath the tree. They were able to spend some time reflecting. They could read, they could study. And even the birds and the animals around the tree benefited from the tree as well. As the children grew up, they felt that no, this tree is now old, it's withered, and they were ready to cut it down. At that point, the surrounding neighbors from the farm came and said, no, don't do that. This tree has provided you with shelter from the rain. It's provided you shelter from the shade from the sunlight. You've studied underneath it. You've read underneath it. You've enjoyed the fruits of the tree. This tree is our culture. It represents our culture from Bharat. The farmer's father represents our ancestors who laid the foundation of this great culture. The farmer represents our parents who have lived and breathed that culture. The neighbors represent humanity who right now recognizes the values of Vasudev Kutumbakam, Ekam Sat Viprabhuta Vedanti, and yoga and self-realization for the benefit of mankind. The children are us. It's time for us to recognize and realize our culture so that we can become ambassadors and share this with the rest of the world. Namaste.